We want to move to one of the most widely held stocks in the market, that's NVIDIA. So I was just looking at the charts myself. I'm not a chart master like you are, but I was looking at the charts myself. Since CES, which is a very small part of this chart, I'm looking at NVIDIA, down just about 8% since there. We all thought that alligator jacket would lead to a rally. I guess it didn't, but you're saying there's a trend here that you're seeing as well that's setting up NVIDIA for a potential bounce.
Yeah, so despite a lot of the carnage we've seen in semis since last July, when you look at NVIDIA, this continues to be a standout leader. And similar to the broader S&P, the stock has pulled back to almost exactly where it needs to think that, okay, it's a great risk reward. Short-term weakness, but no longer-term trend damage. Investors want to be buyers into this pullback.
All right, so I just want to ask you this. NVIDIA is a chip stock. These are cyclical stocks. So when you're looking at the technicals of this stock and you see this trend, any concern that the cycle comes to an end at some point and that's the downturn?
Well, we have to let the stock tell us that. Okay. And unfortunately, we can't bet against ongoing uptrends. You know, most of the stocks is down about 15, 16% from this July peaks of last year. NVIDIA still within striking distance of all-time highs. So, you know, it seems like a very severe short-term pullback. The key lesson for investors is always put the short-term price movement into context of what the longer-term charts are showing. And so the longer-term charts show this remains in great shape.
But, you know, look, I think you can't be sanguine. We keep seeing things, the last-minute things from President Biden about what's going on. This place has been completely roiled by what's going on this weekend when it came to sovereign nations being able to have GPUs, being able to have the key generative AI chips and accelerated computing chips. I spoke to Jensen Huang last night. I mean, there is just the CEO of NVIDIA. There's just chaos about what this administration is doing at the last minute. David, I don't know what the administration is doing at the last minute. It's almost as if they're just saying, you know what, we're going to throw up anything. We're going to do anything. I'm waiting for something really horrible, oil and gas, at the last minute, because that would be fitting with what these people are doing. I come back to the idea that we have one stock that is the elephant in the room, which is NVIDIA. I believe that NVIDIA has been hurt by the Commerce Department's rules. I think those rules, these are the ones that came out midnight this weekend, were a little absurd. They picked who we have 18 friends. 18 friends. I mean, by the way, EU has 29 countries. What happened to Mexico? What happened to Israel? What happened to Iceland, which is the 100% clean energy? They were absurd. They were completely out of touch. I think NVIDIA can bounce back. But without NVIDIA, you have a market that's kind of rootless, because we know that Apple, the numbers look like they're a little bit too high. David, you know that this market survives on NASDAQ fuel, not on Dow fuel, and yet people still insist on talking about the Dow. I defer to you. How important is the Dow in terms of looking at what the market's really doing?
Not at all. In any way, shape, or form. It shouldn't even be discussed. It's just a marketing tool. It's a statistically insignificant index because, of course, it's price-weighted. I don't want to discuss it ever. Jim, I want to get back to NVIDIA.
I just didn't know.
The stock is up 1.4%. You know, there were these reports out. They were out during our show yesterday, by the way, so I don't want to give too much voice to them, but they're around. You know, these the headline is basically top customers facing delays because of glitchy AI chip racks. You have any thoughts about this? I'm sure you're aware of it or heard the story yesterday.
Okay, story comes out when? The day when quiet period begins. That happened the previous quarter, the day when quiet begins. It was done by the information. You know, David, it could be the disinformation. It could be, remember Pravda? I find that this kind of attack on NVIDIA has become standard. And instead, I go to Jensen Huang. Maybe he knows more because he's called the CEO. And he says that absolutely it's shipping 45 factories. They're getting them out as fast as they can. If anyone's complaining, give me a break. I think that is next to David Ricks's launch, Eli Lilly, for GLP-1s, I think the launch of Blackwell is as successful. So I get tired of the attacks on NVIDIA. They bore me.
Yeah, well, they will continue. And yeah, you've taken, I understand. You've taken your shots before, no doubt. We mentioned KB Home at the top.
You've been on the right side of NVIDIA history.
You, without a doubt. Nobody's arguing that.
When it was $2,
absolutely.
When it was $2, I named my dog NVIDIA, and you caught about 133 points.
It's the greatest.
Last I looked, that was still good. Remember, we are about trying to make money for people. We are not a political discussion.
No, it's been a volatile start to the year for NVIDIA overall, the semiconductor sector as well. Today, President Biden issued a new executive order to speed up the construction of AI centers and strengthen national security. This is just one day after announcing a new framework that would limit the scale of AI chips and their sale outside of the U.S. Joining us now is Bernstein analyst Stacy Rasgon. Stacy, always good to have you. What do you make of these newest regulations and the impact perhaps on some of the companies you cover, in particular NVIDIA?
Yeah, it's a little hard to judge impact right now, but we can talk about like what they're doing. So they're putting constraints on the amount of compute capacity that can be shipped out of the US to a certain number of countries. There's 18 countries where they're sort of like favored nation status, kind of business as usual. Customers in those countries can pretty much build as much as they want in those countries. There's a set of countries, you know, China and Russia and other ones that are under like arms embargo where you're not allowed to ship anything. None of those things are really any change. It's in the middle, the other countries where the interesting sort of dynamics happen. Those countries have very sharp limits on how much compute capacity can get put in them. Unless the customers themselves sort of agree to conform to certain standards, basically, you know, be good citizens and the like. And if that's the case, then those customers can build in those countries, but those customers will be limited by how much compute capacity they can deploy. So if you kind of run through it, it's probably manageable for now, but my guess would be as we go along over the next like years, like these constraints in general are probably unlikely to loosen, right? We're sort of in an arms race with some other actors in the world, and you know these constraints in general are likely to tighten up. And in general, that sort of thing it's not great, right? I think right now the overall demand for this stuff is such that this can probably be worked through. And like I said, it does seem like it's workable, but it remains to be seen how these dynamics will play out as we go forward, and whether and how these different kinds of constraints continue to get tightened. And now we have the new administration coming in, which throws a whole new.
I know that career, right? I mean, well, are your expectations they're going to maintain the rules that have been put in place?
Yeah, I don't. You know, the companies that have been impacted, NVIDIA and some others, you know, have sort of been going at the new administration to try to, you know, to advocate for themselves. And I got to be honest, I kind of understand why the Biden administration did this, but at the same time, doing it a week before the administration change, it feels a little shaky. So we'll see what the Trump administration does. But I want to say I'm not sure that the incoming administration. I mean, in general, this idea that we need to be tough on these other areas and we need to be U.S. first. I mean, these are things that I think the new administration is going to want. So I don't know whether or not they will be pulling these. There's some aspects of this that maybe they're not going to like, but my guess is in general, over time, the sanctions probably never get looser in general. They'll probably continue to get tighter.
How do you explain to folks why you think the administration did this?
Well, I mean, it's their last chance to do something like this. And again, the general idea, like trying to control what's out there from a national security standpoint, I understand the rationale. I'm not sure I necessarily totally agree with it, but I understand it. This is their last chance to do it. And again, they're going to force the new administration, like if they want to do something about it, to do something about it. But they put a stake in the ground one way or the other with 1 week to go.
You know, Stacy, today's highest performance chips are tomorrow's lower performance chips. I mean, how does that end up working? Is it always just that we want to stay ahead, so one day they'll be able to get these chips, or not?
Yeah, I mean, like I think when you go through the regulations from yesterday, and we did that, it's preliminary, but when you read through it, as they're written, like I said, it doesn't seem like it's draconian as people. I think when some of the news stories on this came out last week, people were like really, really worried that like they wouldn't be able to ship anything, or that the amount that they would be able to ship in general would be very, very curtailed. If you look at like the favored nation countries, they're the major ones where a lot of this is going, and the U.S. guys can build as much as they need here in the U.S. and they have leeway to build outside of the U.S. to a fairly large degree. So when you sort of read through it, they weren't necessarily as draconian. They were fairly severe. Like, don't get me wrong, I was a little surprised when the news flow started to come up, but they weren't as completely draconian as maybe people had feared they might have been. And so, but this sort of stuff destroys volatility. And like, let's be honest, like when the new administration comes in, it's going to be volatility every day. Like I've said this before, but when Trump was president last time, I'm spending every morning waking up, the first thing I do is check Twitter to see what the policy of the day is. So we'll probably be going back to some of that. Volatility in general is going to be higher.
Yeah, we'll be doing the same thing you are. Although I think it's Truth Social these days, not X.
Social.
Yeah. Stacy, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P finished the day about 0.1% higher, and NVIDIA finished the day 1.1% lower. We've been seeing volatility in NVIDIA recently due to multiple news events. First, the White House released a newly proposed AI chip export rule that has drawn criticism from multiple countries and industry leaders. NVIDIA published a scathing response to the proposed rule, saying that it, quote, threatens to squander America's hard-won technological advantage. It is important to note that the new rule does not go into effect until after a 120-day comment period, and so the decision will ultimately be up to the incoming administration. I'll be completely honest. I think the incoming administration is likely to roll back at least some of this rule because it does appear to be very far-reaching. And then today, Biden signed a new executive order regarding the build-out of AI infrastructure in the U.S. According to Reuters, the order calls for leasing federal sites owned by defense and energy departments to host gigawatt-scale AI data centers and new clean power facilities to address enormous power needs on a short time frame. And of course, we also got an article from The Information claiming that some of NVIDIA's clients are facing delays due to glitchy AI chip racks. I have no idea if this story is true or not. I'm just bringing it to your attention so that you're aware of it. All of these recent news events have been causing short-term volatility in NVIDIA stock. Now, I have no idea what to expect in the short term because anything could happen. With that being said, I am still bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA, and I think the company's brightest days are still ahead. Blackwell is just starting to ramp in volume. NVIDIA has a massive competitive moat across both hardware and software, and we have a clear product roadmap from NVIDIA for 2025 and 2026. Looking ahead, we have NVIDIA earnings scheduled for February 26th, and then NVIDIA's GTC March 17th through the 21st. I think GTC is likely to be more of a market-moving event than CES was. CES was geared mainly toward consumers. GTC, on the other hand, is where we are likely to get news about data center, which is where NVIDIA makes the majority of their revenue. We may learn more about Rubin at GTC, and we may possibly even learn about the next generation after Rubin. In the short term, anything could happen, and we're likely to have some volatility over the next couple of weeks. But from a long-term perspective, I still think the thesis surrounding NVIDIA and the build-out of AI infrastructure remains intact. As long as everything remains peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their capex, then I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years. At least that's my view of the situation. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.